One way for us to learn more is, of course, pay attention to the anomalies because they may lead us to something that we've never thought about.
Harvard astrophysicist Avi Loeb is not your typical astronomer. He's the head of the Harvard research program known as the Galileo Project that's looking for extraterrestrial technologies.
So instead of waiting for the US government to release its data, we just look up and ask, are there any objects up there that are not human-made?
What can we discover from interstellar objects like the Oumuamua?
The object exhibited an excess push away from the sun without shedding any gas or dust.
So at this moment, what do we actually know about extraterrestrial life?
Imagining God as an entity that can attend only to one child is very limiting.
This is American Thought Leaders, and I'm Yanya Kellick. Professor Avi Loeb, such a pleasure to have you on American Thought Leaders.
Thanks for having me.
Professor Loeb, is there intelligent life out there?
I very much hope so, because one reason I'm searching for a higher intelligence, I don't often find it here on Earth. Frankly, given that there are 100 billion stars like the sun in the Milky Way galaxy alone, and we now know that about 10% of them have a planet the size of the Earth, roughly at the same separation. And moreover, science argues that, life started on Earth from a soup of chemicals. If you arrange for similar circumstances on a billion Earth-Sun analogs in the Milky Way galaxy, very likely there was a more accomplished space entrepreneur than Elon Musk since the Big Bang 13.8 billion years ago. And all we need to do is check whether there are any objects arriving to our backyard that were launched by a neighbor.
Professor Loeb, there are all sorts of types of messaging that are coming out from our government. We have Representative Anna Paulina Luna basically agitating to get disclosures. We've had hearings. We've had, both President Trump and President Obama talk about extraterrestrial life in this cagey way. I believe President Obama even said he believes that it exists. So why this caginess? You make it sound like we don't really know.
Well, we don't know because we don't have conclusive evidence that was presented to us. And there are two ways at getting to this evidence. It's either in the hands of government, because the US government was monitoring the sky and the oceans for many decades. And in the process of doing that, the defense budget is huge. It's close to $1 trillion for 2026. The process of collecting a lot of data, they may have noticed unusual phenomena that are quite rare. And so that's one way for us to get at the truth about the physical reality, about our neighborhood. The second is, of course, to do the scientific work needed, invest funds and research effort in trying to find evidence for extraterrestrials. And, in 1950, the physicist Enrico Fermi was having lunch at Los Alamos. He was part of the Manhattan Project and stayed there later. And they were discussing extraterrestrials back then. That's 76 years ago. And he was commenting, well, they're likely to exist, but where is everybody? And if I were next to him, I would put my arm around his shoulder and say, Enrico, that is a question that every lonely person asks. And what you tell a lonely person is, don't be so presumptuous. You're not that attractive. Your partner will not come to you. You should be proactive and search for the partner. And Enrico didn't really build a telescope. He didn't look for the evidence. Space and time are vast in astronomical terms. We are talking about the size of the Milky Way's tens of thousands of light years. And the age of the Milky Way is roughly 10 billion years. So you can't just ask sitting at lunch, why aren't they next to me? You have to search for them. And we haven't done that extensively. Right now, the astronomy community decided as its highest priority to search for microbes. And they're willing to pay of the order of $10 billion or more in the next 2 decades in order to build a space observatory that would give us a hint about the chemical fingerprints of microbes on other planets. My point is, when you go on a date, you better aim high, not low. And therefore, I would be much happier if instead of meeting a microbe as my dating partner, I would meet a more intelligent being, because then there is a chance of learning from that being and becoming better. And so I say, let's invest similar level of funding in the search for technological civilizations, because we can potentially benefit much more. It will change the future of humanity. And we have the tools for that. And even though microbes might be much more abundant in the universe, it might be easier to identify a technological gadget, because you would see that, it has buttons on it. It's not a rock. And so it will be very clear to us that not only life exists, but intelligent life exists. And, we're all familiar with the Copernican revolution, which indicated that we are not at the center of the universe. And it might well be that we are not at the intellectual center of the universe. There is someone smarter than us, a sibling in our family that is more accomplished. And that would actually bring us to a better place.
So you don't believe that we've been visited?
Oh, I don't know. We may have well been visited. In fact, we don't know the history of Earth. Documented human history is only 8,000 years old. And the question is, what introduced life here on Earth? Maybe it was an interstellar gardener. We just don't know that. As far as we can do is to basically monitor the sky and check if there are any visitors to our backyard. That's the minimum we can do. We've been searching for 65 years for radio signals, but that's just like waiting for a phone call. In fact, we do not use radio communication as much as we did a century ago. So I think checking for objects is a new frontier that is enabled by the next generation of sensors that we are starting to employ right now. And this offers us a great opportunity to discover things that we've never known about before.
And what about, President Trump's recent commitment to offer some disclosure? Like what do you think the government has been hiding, right? Obviously there's classified information that isn't available to us. Maybe, I don't know if some of it is available to you or not. Obviously you're not going to tell me that. But, why is this being kept under wraps?
Well, it's an interesting question, and the fact that serious people talk about this means that it's not a hallucination. It's not something that should be dismissed, because apparently the U.S. intelligence agencies, as well as the Pentagon, have evidence for objects that do not behave like human-made technologies. And as far as I can tell, I haven't seen that evidence. It may represent data from satellites that was never disclosed publicly, or materials that were collected in crash sites. But at any event, it implies that it's an embarrassment to the intelligence agencies because they get paid to figure out what flies in our sky. And if they're not able to do that, they might prefer to hide it from congressional scrutiny, for example. Also, if it's clearly not related to human-made technologies, they might brush it aside and say, well, that's potentially an interesting scientific matter, what lies beyond the solar system, but that's not our jurisdiction. We are supposed to focus on national security. The government is not a scientific organization that should figure out what lies beyond the solar system. This is the day job of astrophysicists like myself, and I would love to help government figure it out if they have evidence of this nature. So far, the only videos and imagery that were released were of relatively low quality, that is not conclusive. You cannot tell the distance of the objects that you're seeing. You cannot tell how fast they're moving, how much are they accelerating, whether they behave beyond human-made technologies. And so that's why I decided to establish lead the Galileo Project, where we built our own observatory. So instead of waiting for the government, the US government, to release its data, we just look up and ask, are there any objects up there that are not human-made? And Of course, anything that is human-made is boring as far as I'm concerned. Of course, it's the main focus of the Pentagon, but for me as a scientist interested in what lies beyond the solar system, I really am eager to see if there's anything else. And these observatories, by now we have 3 of them, one in Massachusetts, another one in Pennsylvania, and a third one in Nevada. Even if we don't find anything, I mean, we're looking at the millions of objects every year, analyzing the data with machine learning software and trying to figure out if there are any outliers. Even if we don't find anything, I would feel that I did something important, because I'm happy to provide the technology of the sensors that we used, the architecture of the observatories, as well as the software that we developed to the Pentagon, so that they can use the same to identify objects in the sky for the benefit of national security. So this effort will not be wasted, and I believe that this subject belongs to the mainstream of science. Rather than ignore unidentified anomalous phenomena, we should focus on these anomalies, because discovering something beyond this earth, technological, would be the biggest discovery ever made in science.
It's beyond human imagination. If you made a horror movie about it, people go, I don't know, I don't believe that, that's too crazy.
This book, 20 years in the making, I feel like this moment is where all the roads have been leading to.
I think it's one of the great evils ever. The Nazi doctors paled.
When I first heard about it, I didn't want to believe it. It's about the Chinese Communist Party's forced organ harvesting industry, basically a murder for organs industry.
Have there been survivors? Can you tell us about the survivors?
This crime against humanity is real, and we can end it. We can actually at least end America's complicity in it. So please join me, spread the word, and together I really think we can make a difference.
See you March 16th.
That's right.
You can do it. We'll see you there.
So I had a conversation impromptu with a pretty prominent but low-key person. He told me that he had been flying basically these kinds of listening missions in the 50s, okay, for the U.S. Air Force, and that he himself encountered doing this at one point, something that was basically moving around his plane in a way that was impossible by their own calculation. He saw it, right, sort of around his plane. What have you heard, and what do you believe about the credibility of claims that you've heard?
Yeah, so there were military personnel, including pilots, who testified in Congress, and I truly believe them. But the issue with eyewitness testimonies, and there are testimonies only also from the FBI, about events that cannot be easily explained away. These are people with integrity that you trust, and clearly they have seen something unusual, but in difference from the legal system where eyewitness testimonies can put someone in jail. You know, in science, you cannot rely on what people tell you. We all know about prisoners that were put on death row and then were exonerated as a result of DNA testing. And, humans are often misled, and they might tell you a story that is not factually correct. And so we need to verify whether things like that exist by getting scientific quality data. And perhaps the US government already has that. And then I would love to be part of a board that reviews those pieces of evidence, as long as they're quantified and documented, and then to recommend to the US president as to what to do about it, or what to release to the public. There could be two phases to this analysis, one in which credible people, scientists, look into the data and recommend what it means, also what to do next in terms of analyzing it, collecting more data. And the second is what to release publicly, because any such information obviously will cause some unrest and in the financial markets, in the public at large. we don't want to cry wolf too often. And so, for example, there is a new frontier right now in astronomy, which is the detection of objects that arrive to our backyard from outside the solar system. The first one was announced in 2017, less than a decade ago. And then since then, we found two more with telescopes. There will be many more, dozens more in the coming decade from the Rubin Observatory, funded by the Department of Energy and the National Science Foundation in Chile. And so the fundamental question is, how can we decide whether any of them is technological in origin? And of course, that relies on data. So I suggested a classification scale back in July when 3I Atlas, the latest interstellar object, was discovered. I said that we should classify those on a scale between 0 and 10, where 0 is a natural, definitely natural object, an asteroid or a comet, and 10 means alien technology that is a potential threat to humanity. And even if the rank is low, we should consider a black swan event, because we are all familiar with September 11th, October 7th. These are events that the intelligence agencies classified incorrectly, and they ended up having a huge impact on society, even though the intelligence agencies thought that they have a low probability of materializing. And so I recommend that we basically rank each and every interstellar object and decide whether it's a potential threat to humanity, because we never know if our dating partner is friendly or hostile. It could be a serial killer. And so that would give a new meaning to defending Earth. As of now, we only thought about rocks that could be a risk to metropolitan areas. If the rock is bigger than a football field, it could destroy a huge region, city-like region on Earth. And so we are trying to identify all the rocks that may impact the Earth, but we haven't thought about defending Earth against alien technology because we haven't collected enough evidence, at least beyond government, on such objects. And so we should be, of course, aware of that. But with respect to the data the government already has, I will be delighted to look into that. And I think the decision by President Trump represents an important step forward in that context.
So you don't think there's the Men in Black agency?
No, I think that probably the government does not know what it means. And they may have, if they have materials, they may have provided the materials to corporations. Because I had a visitor to my home that used to be a senior executive at Lockheed Martin. And he noted that the idea that Lockheed Martin received materials from crash sites that may be extraterrestrial technological material is not necessarily wrong. And then I asked another former employee of Lockheed Martin. He denied any such connection. So it may well be compartmentalized within those corporations. And maybe even some of the information is not delivered to the President of the United States. I just don't know how far it goes. And there is, of course, the All-Domain Anomaly Resolution Office in the Pentagon that was tasked to identify and figure out past reports. And they told me when I visited them less than a year ago, they told me that they looked into all the reports and did not find anything credible to indicate extraterrestrial technological origin, except for a few FBI reports. These are things that, in fact, Representative Anna Paulina Luna is aiming to look into, thanks to the decision by President Trump. And I'm in close contact with Representative Luna. I think she's doing excellent work. And I very much hope to assist her with my scientific knowledge if she gets access to such information.
Okay, so I'm kind of imagining these kind of buckets of evidence, right? You said we have radio listening stations. There's not much going on there. We have, these sort of people seeing these unusual phenomena. In some cases, they really believe they're real. They're testifying to it under oath. It's unclear what that is. It's unclear if has been some designation. That might be something that's disclosed. We have these extra solar objects, extra solar system objects that are coming through. Actually, one that I wanted to ask you about, because you've commented on, is Oumuamua. We'll get to that in just a moment. We have these sort of casual testimonies of people coming in and from Lockheed Martin and saying, "Hey, wait a sec. I know something that no one else knows," and we don't really know what to make of them. What other buckets of evidence are there that you're aware of?
I think the most important bucket is the scientific one, where we could potentially figure out whether we have a neighbor without the assistance of the US government, just by looking up. And this path of research was opened up over the past decade with the discovery of interstellar objects. There was, even before Oumuamua, the first recognized interstellar object, there was actually a meteor that was identified by US government satellites back in 2014 that landed in the Pacific Ocean, created a fireball that released about 1% of the Hiroshima atomic bomb energy. It was a half a meter sized object, and it was moving very fast, so fast that it couldn't be bound by gravity to the solar system. We inferred that with my student. And so I decided to lead an expedition to the Pacific Ocean to search for the materials of this interstellar meteor. And the US Space Command, after I reached out through the White House to them, they provided confirmation that based on the data, indeed this object came from outside the solar system. It had material strength that was tougher than all the meteors cataloged by NASA. And so we went there, and there will be a Netflix documentary coming out in 2026, hopefully, showing the expedition that I led. We found some material with compositions different from solar system abundances of elements. And but as to whether it's technological, like Voyager, or maybe just a rock, we cannot yet conclusively tell. We would need to bring up bigger pieces. We found only tiny molten droplets from there. So that was an interesting approach. And in principle, the US government perhaps visited the crash sites and collected materials that indicate something extrasolar, as you say. There is a very simple way of telling. The abundances of isotopes can be checked in a very straightforward manner. That's what we did with the materials from the Pacific Ocean. So if the US government has some materials, I can immediately tell them whether these materials came from outside the solar system. And then the question is, what kind of technologies are being represented there? And that will be fascinating. It will change our view about our place in the universe. Currently, we think about the cosmos as a cold and lonely place. The textbooks, some of which I wrote, refer to the universe as being made of matter and radiation, and something that doesn't really appeal to the human spirit. And on the other hand, if we realize that we have siblings out there, we will get an emotional connection. If they visit our backyard, we should visit their backyard. So we will become much more ambitious. We might want to defend Earth against any risk coming from alien technology. And so I see that as a transformation that humanity will go through. I had a visit by a group of theologians that were led by the current president of the Templeton Foundation, Tim Darmilpel. They came to Harvard and asked me, what would be the implication if we find extraterrestrials to be out there? And I said, it will not have a huge impact on your religious beliefs, because when I had two daughters, and when the second one was born, it didn't take away any of the love that I have to the first one. And so imagining God as an entity that can attend only to one child is very limiting. And they were very happy with this answer.
Do we know now more than we did even, I'm thinking about the 50s, which is when, there's these topics seem to have started coming up. And then there's even, these Roswell sites and so forth of crash sites. You're kind of telling me there's really no evidence from those places, right?
No, it may well be that the evidence is within government. And one thing to keep in mind, whatever technologies were used by humans in 1950 are not being used anymore. They are completely irrelevant today. And so there is no reason to hide evidence, material or imagery from the Roswell case out of national security concerns. If there is anything unusual from 50 years ago, let's look into it, because it cannot risk national security today. And I also say that if we do identify things that behave in strange ways, it makes no sense to hide the evidence, because it would be similar to finding a tennis ball in your backyard, and then you go and have dinner with your family members and you hide this information from them. That makes little sense, because if the tennis ball was thrown by a neighbor, that neighbor may show up at the front door or affect the life of your family members in many different ways. And I think we should all be aware of our cosmic neighborhood. When the Vatican tried to hide the information from the public about what Galileo Galilei found with his telescope, they could hide it for a while, but eventually in 1992, they had to come out and say that Galileo was right and the Earth moves around the sun. It was meaningless for them to continue arguing otherwise, because we had we reached the moon 2 decades earlier, and so it was not good for public relations. My point is, in the long term, you want to reveal information about our cosmic neighborhood to all humans, because we are all in the same boat. And in fact, it would bring, in my view, it will bring a sense of cooperation, because if we realize that we have a neighbor, suppose your neighbor comes and knocks on the door, then obviously it makes little sense to have a loud argument within the family. I mean, often things quiet down when someone knocks on the door at home. And so that may actually calm down some of the conflicts we have in geopolitics if we all realize that there is someone else out there.
One thing that just occurred to me, what about the concept of extra-dimensional life, right? Is this something that you've looked into?
Yeah, so this is actually a very popular theme within the context of theoretical physics over the past 50 years. Because one of the big puzzles in physics is how to unify two pillars. One is quantum mechanics, which is the foundation for all the electronic gadgets that we're using, and the computers and the AI and everything. And the second is general relativity, which is Einstein's theory of gravity that explains gravity as the curvature of space and time. And we just don't have a theory that puts together, marries quantum mechanics with gravity. And you might say, well, where is it needed? Why do we need them to be parts of a unified theory? And the answer is, when space and time are being curved very much, then quantum effects start playing a role. And that was true at the Big Bang. When the universe started, the density of matter and radiation were huge. They diverged because the universe is expanding. So just go back in time. There was a time when everything was extremely dense. And as a result, one needs quantum mechanics to describe how gravity behaves at those early times. The same is true at the center of a black hole, which is basically a point that collects matter and has extreme gravity near it. And these singularities at the center of a black hole or at the Big Bang cannot be attended to without a unification of quantum mechanics and gravity. And also, I would say, if we were to figure out how to unify quantum mechanics and gravity, we might realize new propulsion methods. There are various ideas along these lines. We might not need rockets. We might, for example, distort space and time in ways that allow us to propel a spacecraft much more effectively with very little fuel. And so it's possible that other technological civilizations could have mastered that because they have a theory of quantum gravity. They know how they have quantum gravity engineers. Whether we have extra dimensions or not, we don't know. But the string theory, which is the leading theory for unifying quantum mechanics and gravity, postulates the existence of extra dimensions. And also, you could imagine some other means of curving space and time that does not even refer to the extra dimensions that relate to quantum gravity. So altogether, I would say our scientific knowledge, we know, is limited. And we don't know what most of the matter in the universe is. We call it dark matter. We don't know what happened in the Big Bang because we don't have a quantum gravity theory. And so we're pretty ignorant despite of 100 years of modern science and technology. We still don't know some fundamentals. And of course, another civilization may have discovered the solution to these puzzles. And we could figure it out once we realize that they are here. We could learn from them. You might ask, how would we detect them? Maybe they avoid our sensors because they have they operate in a completely different plane of technologies. But the way I approach it is just like approaching a blind date. You should not have a prejudice. You should be completely agnostic and observe the other side and look for something unusual, something that is not similar to the natural terrestrial objects that we've seen before.
When I talk about the idea of this, extra dimensional life, right? For someone that isn't familiar with theory of relativity and quantum mechanics, how do you conceive of that even?
Yeah, so just think about living on the surface of a balloon, okay, and that is two-dimensional. And you might not be aware that there is a third dimension because you are just living on the surface of that balloon. So if there is another being that is capable of taking advantage of the third dimension, then that being will cross the distance between 2 points on the surface of the balloon faster than you can imagine, because the travel between the 2 points can go through the third dimension that connects the 2 points, not necessarily on the curved surface of the balloon. So there are, in principle, possibilities of navigating in more than the dimensions that we are familiar with. We are familiar with 3 spatial dimensions plus time, and if there are more than 3, and there is a technological way of taking advantage of those, we might not realize that objects will appear and disappear in ways that we cannot understand. And in the 3 dimensions that we are familiar with, Einstein's theory of relativity states that no material object can move faster than light. However, if there are extra dimensions, you might actually travel faster than light in the 3 dimensions, even though you're traveling less than the speed of light in the extra dimensions. So there are lots of possibilities. And by the way I think about physics is a way of setting constraints on our imagination. Because our imagination can think of lots of possibilities. In order to figure out which one is correct, we need to collect data. And you might say, oh, that's the scientific method. But many of my colleagues in academia, they're very conservative. They are not willing to consider new physics easily. And so they brush anomalies under the carpet of traditional thinking. And one way for us to learn more is, of course, pay attention to the anomalies because they may lead us to something that we've never thought about. There is this, most of the funding in science is allocated to known unknowns. These are things that we know that we don't know. But there are based on what Rumsfeld said, that there are unknown unknowns, which are even more important because these are things that we don't even recognize that we don't know. And the only way to find them is, not to follow the beaten path and explore anomalies, things that we don't fully understand. Maybe they will open up our eyes to extra dimensions, as you say, or new physics.